what you want to know. So as a consultant, I rely on data provided to me by experts, in this case, Mr. Calvanico and Mr. Emery. We report based on that. So based on the number provided through the appraisal by Mr. Calvanico and what the schedules call for, the difference is where the obsolescence was calculated.
Okay. And again, but my question is more basic than that. A moment ago, you testified that the basis for the request for obsolescence
Yes, sir.
submitted on behalf of Interfin is substantiated in the appraisal. I'm asking you, where
By
is
the
that?
appraisal.
By the appraisal. Where is that?
Sir, I'm not an appraisal expert. I can just tell you that when an expert hands me a document, I base my work on that because I am not an expert. And that's, my honest answer to you is that is how this was done.
Okay, can you tell me what information was provided to the assessor for Beauregard, Calcasieu, and Vernon Parish to support the request for a reduction in value for obsolescence?
Yes, sir.
On behalf of Emery?
The appraisal.
The appraisal. Tell you what, let's get back to Schedule 5. I think it's the second to last page of this document.
What does it look like, sir?
It's a table.
Is this it?
Yes, I believe.
I have the same problem you did. It's
Yeah.
very small, yes.
Okay, I've reviewed this appraisal very, very carefully, and this is the only discussion I have been able to find regarding obsolescence.
Okay, yes, sir.
I mean, is there any other discussion in this appraisal regarding obsolescence that you're aware of?
No, other than where these numbers came from in the descriptions, I would presume.
Okay,
And again, I have to presume, I did not prepare the appraisal.
okay.
What schedule are we looking at?
It's the next to the last page, sir, in the back.
It's Schedule 5, but it's kind of shaded on my copy. You can barely read the.
Would it be helpful if I approach and show you which page?
Yeah, because I see a
Okay, if I
schedule.
may.
Am I looking at the right document?
Exhibit B.
Yes, sir. If I may.
This is
Sorry,
Exhibit E.
paper space. It's this page here, sir.
Which,
It's just really hard to see. It's not, it's one, in the package we had that you handed me, it was one different from that.
Second last page.
Oh, that's it. That's it.
which one? Look, I don't see a Schedule 5.
It looks like each copier got lighted.
That's,
This is Schedule 4.
this is the one that we were.
This is it? Okay, all right, Schedule 4. It says it's Schedule 4. I was looking for a Schedule 5.
Again, Mr. Driggs, I want to make sure I was showing the right page. This is one, correct? Oops, sorry.
Mine says 5 also.
Okay.
Okay, now, before we go on to discuss this page, and if you need, we can take another break with this document, is there any other information in this appraisal explaining the basis of Mr. Calvanico's obsolescence reduction?
I would presume the entire document describes his presumptions.
Tell me where.
Sir, I didn't draft it. I don't mean to be argumentative,
Okay.
but I don't know the
If
appraisal.
If
that
I were
well.
to tell you that this is the only discussion of it, you would not disagree with me?
No, sir.
Okay. Can you tell me how functional obsolescence was calculated? It's in the table.
Well, but let me ask, just object, are you talking about in the appraisal or in the renditions?
We'll start with the rendition. That's an excellent point. Let's start with the rendition.
The obsolescence used in the renditions was from the rulings from the tax commission.
Okay. And the rulings on the tax commission was based upon what? Do you know?
Data from 2017. That would have been from 2017.
2017. So in this case, well, let's go back to functional obsolescence in the appraisal that was provided to the assessors.
Yes, sir.
For functional obsolescence, it has current MAOP divided by original.
Okay.
And we recall that is basically the maximum operating pressure divided by the maximum average operating pressure on a current basis divided to the original.
Okay.
And here it's listed as a percent, correct?
Show me which column you're looking at, please.
Well, look under functional obsolescence.
Okay. Yes, sir.
There are two columns. There is the current MAOP divided by original.
Yes, sir. See that?
And that's just a percentage, correct?
Correct, yes, sir.
And so that 69%, that represents the percentage of current operating pressure to original.
Based on what it says here, sir, yes, sir, I presume
Okay.
it does.
And then the next column, depreciation, basically that's just the amount of reduction on that 69% operating pressure.
I'd have to run the math on it, but visually, it appears that would be right.
Okay. On functional obsolescence, other than providing the assessors with this appraisal that shows a 69% average operating pressure into original, did you provide any other information in support of functional obsolescence to the assessors?
No, sir.
Mr. Calvanico last year, and it's in the record, testified that the company provided him and that he based these numbers on engineering reports. Did you provide those engineering reports?
No, sir, I
to the
never had,
assessors?
Mr. Calvanico's engagement with Interfin was separate from mine. I don't have that
Right.
data.
But other than providing Mr. Calvanico's appraisal, you were the interface with the assessors, correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
So again, so the only substantive information you provided to them was Mr. Calvanico's appraisal?
Yes, sir, correct.
Correct?
Yes, sir.
Let's look at the next column for external obsolescence.
Okay.
It has percent utilized. Do you know what that represents?
Throughput of the pipe.
Now, you testified that you're familiar with the rules and regulations. You, in fact, have been pretty actively engaged in the tax commission's rules and regulations.
I've been here once or twice, yes, sir.
Okay. You are aware that the tax commission's rules and regulations used to contain a formula for calculating economic obsolescence?
Yes, sir. It was the Chilton,
Throughput.
it was effectively the Chilton formula.
Right, and you remember it was a factored equation though, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Calvanico testified that these numbers aren't factored, that he's claiming it's 9.3% utilized and therefore claiming a 90.7% reduction.
Okay.
Is that Chilton equation still in the rules and regulations?
No, sir, it's not.
Okay, the second column where it says depreciation, that's just monetization of that utilization percentage?
You would have to confirm that with Mr. Calvanico.
Okay. Did you provide any documentation to the assessors for Beauregard, Calcasieu, Vernon parishes supporting the claim that, for instance, the Beauregard, 7 miles of Beauregard line is utilized at 9.3%?
No, sir, we provided this document.
So all you provided was that we're using this particular line at 9.3, some at 6.5, and some at 5.9.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Calvanico testified that he was provided engineering reports. Did you provide those engineering reports to the assessors?
Again, no, sir, I wasn't privy to that information.
Okay. There's a document that your attorneys have pre-filed marked as Exhibit D. I'm going to hand you this document.
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize that document?
I think I have seen it before.
Now, you earlier testified that the only information you provided to the assessors was the appraisal and your renditions. Was that document provided to the assessors for Beauregard, Calcasieu, or Vernon parishes?
It's not my belief that it was,
Okay.
but I'd have to confirm that with my teams.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions for this witness.
Let me just do a couple of brief follow-ups. Mr. Frederickson, are you aware, you were present at the 2017 hearing?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware that the record reflects that the 2017 hearing, the Beauregard and Vernon Parish assessors were actually present and sworn in?
I do believe I remember that.
Are you aware that whether the Beauregard, Vernon, and Calcasieu parishes assessors were provided with the 2017 appraisal in 2017?
They were.
Are you aware that the Beauregard and Vernon Parish assessors necessarily were provided with copies of the commission's decisions for 2017?
I would assume they were. There's public information.
Then they were actually parties to those decisions.
Okay.
And that was my other point. The Calcasieu Parish assessor, that's public information. These hearings are streamed live. The commission's decisions are public information. So the assessors certainly had the commission's 2017 decisions as far as you're concerned.
Yes, ma'am, that seems appropriate.
Did Mr. Eddington questioned you about the 2018 appraisal that was provided to the assessors in 2018, correct?
Correct.
And that, from your understanding, that 2018 appraisal, in the view of Enerfin, would have justified an economic and functional obsolescence lower than what was reflected on your rendition.
That's correct.
In other words, it would have reflected a value less than what was put on your rendition.
Yes, ma'am.
But the taxpayer did not rely on that 2018 appraisal in calculating obsolescence, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the taxpayer relied entirely on the commission's decisions as to obsolescence in calculating obsolescence.
Correct.
So the best support for the renditions, the obsolescence in the renditions, is the commission's publicly available decisions, specifically for Beauregard and Vernon Parish.
Yes, ma'am, that's why I made that reference at the beginning of my statement.
I have no further questions.
No questions.
All right, thank you. Ms. Eddington? Did any more, you're done?
No more witnesses.
Okay.
Okay, I would call Assessor Wendy Aguilar. Ms. Aguilar, you are the assessor for Calcasieu Parish, are you not?
Yes.
And you are personally familiar with your office's assessment of the property belonging to Enerfin Field Services?
Yes, I am.
First off, can you tell me how your office went about valuing that property? Did it do it in accordance with the rules and regulations promulgated by the tax commission?
Yes, it did.
You did apply the tables.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about how you calculated those values.
We have all but 2 of the 15 lines are depreciated to the floor, so they're depreciated by 80%. All but 5 of the 15 lines are inactive. And that means about 54.61 miles are inactive gathering lines. And because they were inactive, want me to go into that more?
Please.
Okay, because we had that section of inactive lines, we did give additional obsolescence.
Okay, and Enerfin was requesting additional obsolescence above and beyond what you granted, did they not?
Correct.
And you were present for Mr. Frederickson's testimony a few moments ago regarding the information and the appraisal that was provided to your office.
Yes.
And I'm going to hand you a copy of that and have you look at Schedule 5 of that appraisal. That was the page that I was discussing with Mr. Frederickson.
Correct.
Is this the information that was provided to your office in support of Enerfin's obsolescence request?
Yes.
Did you consider this information sufficient documentation and significant substantiation of their obsolescence request?
No.
For instance, they have functional obsolescence based upon a purported 69%, that is operating at 69% of its original maximum allowable operating pressure. Did they provide you any documentation supporting that calculation?
No.
So all you had was an appraiser's percentage, correct?
Correct.
With no supporting documentation.
Correct.
What about economic obsolescence? Can you tell me a little bit, based upon your review of the document that was submitted to you, on what you understood them to be requesting as the basis of their economic obsolescence request?
I believe they were basing it on the percentage given by the commission in the last ruling.
Okay. Well, in the table, it says percent utilized. And what does that represent to you? Or what do you understand that figure to mean?
Well, I believe that they're stating that they are underutilizing a specific line or something to
And that's
that
what's
effect.
commonly known as throughput?
Correct.
Or the throughput calculation?
Correct.
Does your office use throughput or percent utilization in determining economic obsolescence?
It's not in the tables anymore, so we don't really look at that.
I mean, can you explain why you don't use it after it's been removed from the rules and regulations?
Basically, because we followed the tables, and it's no longer in the tables, so we aren't using the throughput.
Now, economic obsolescence is obviously an economic loss, and is that not typically proven by providing financial statements to your
Usually,
office?
yes.
Were financial statements provided to your office?
No.
I'm going to hand you a document that is marked as Interfund Exhibit D, and ask, are you familiar, or have you ever seen that document, at least before I showed it to you yesterday?
No, I'm not.
Was that information provided to your office?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions. Answer any questions Ms. Cornick might have.
You said you gave functional obsolescence only to the inactive lines?
I'm sorry, say that again?
You said you gave, if I understand, you gave functional obsolescence only to the inactive lines?
In addition to the depreciation?
Correct.
Correct.
Did you give any obsolescence at all to the active lines?
I don't believe we did, no.
Okay.
I didn't work these myself, but I don't believe we did.
Okay. And you said that the reason, and I want to understand why, the reason you did not give economic obsolescence is because it's not in the tables?
No, because I didn't get any financials to back up or substantiate doing any further economic obsolescence, or any economic obsolescence.
Are financials the only thing you will consider for economic obsolescence?
No, I will consider anything that's provided to me.
Did you, you were aware, though, of the commission's decisions last year?
Correct.
On the, and you were aware that after hearing testimony from all the witnesses here at the time, and after being aware of Enerfin's request for functional economic obsolescence last year, you were aware of how the commission calculated the appropriate obsolescence for this line?
I was aware that the commission granted additional obsolescence. I don't have a clue how it was calculated, but I was aware that the commission had granted additional obsolescence, but I believe there's also a suit moving forward with that.
Okay, so that's what I did. Did you review, the commission has reasons for its decision, you're aware of that?
Yes.
Did you review that or consider that in your determination of whether to provide obsolescence?
Yes.
Did you reject that?
Yes.
And tell me why.
Because I, at this point, have reviewed what lines I have in my parish, which are different than the information for Beauregard and Vernon, and was not included in last year. So the commission did not rule on my parish. Therefore, I did not consider what the commission did in Beauregard or Vernon necessarily something that I needed to follow.
So the fact that they reviewed a significant level of obsolescence appropriate for the system as a whole did not factor into your decision?
No.
Okay.
Actually, I do have one follow-up question I forgot to ask. You were in the hearing room when Mr. Emery testified earlier.
Yes.
Did not, he offered extensive testimony about their business model, about their net operating income, about the percentage of taxes. Was any of that information ever provided to your office?
No.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Let me ask a question.
Of me?
My concern is in Rapides Parish, the assessor did give some significant obsolescence. Is there significant difference between Rapides Parish and, in your case, Calcasieu, to where in Rapides Parish, this significant obsolescence was justified, but it's not justified in Calcasieu?
Well, in other parishes, I believe that the pipes that they're discussing, which are oversized pipes, being underutilized, are 10-inch pipes. In Calcasieu, they're running 3 to 6 inch lines. We also don't have compressors and all of that. So based on the information that I have in my parish, I made the best decision for my parish.
Did you get a copy of the appraisal? Was
Yes.
that provided to you?
Yes.
And that did not give you any cause to want to investigate further with regard to possible future obsolescence?
Well, I also felt like I was being as generous, as you would say, maybe, as the commission was in granting the additional obsolescence to the inactive lines, because that's the majority of what they have in Calcasieu. So above and beyond the depreciation of 80%, I gave a 90% additional obsolescence on the inactive lines.
Okay.
And out of 67.81 miles of line, 54.61 of them are inactive, which I gave additional obsolescence on.
And so what value was left when you did that?
I believe,
Roughly.
I can give you
I
the
mean, like-
tax dollars. I know what it did with the tax dollars. I don't remember exactly what it did with the valuation, but it was roughly $5,700 for their taxes
On the...
on all of their lines.
On all their lines?
Yes.
So their total tax, we're talking about value, but
Right.
their total tax bill in Calcasieu Parish is $5,700
Roughly.
approximately?
Yes, sir.
And Wendy, I know Calcasieu has tons of pipelines.
Yes, sir.
All the inactive lines are all treated the same, correct?
They should be, yes, sir.
And lines that are abandoned are treated differently than inactive lines?
Correct.
Okay. So abandoned lines are really at zero value or taken off the
Very,
books,
very little.
or very
very,
little,
very little.
depending on the circumstances?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want me to look for actual?
No,
Okay.
no, that's...
I have
that's
it
good
somewhere in
enough.
this folder.
So my next witness, I'd call Rhonda Ferris. Ms. Ferris, could you please state your name for the record?
Rhonda Ferris,
And by whom are you employed?
Board Assessor.
And what is your position?
I'm the Chief Deputy Assessor.
And
What parish is she? I didn't hear it clearly.
you are familiar with your office's valuation of the property owned by Interfin, are you not?
Yes.
Well, first, let's start off. Can you tell me how your office went about valuing Interfin's pipelines located in Beauregard Parish?
They had 9 4-inch or 6-inch pipelines that we actually assess as lease lines.
And you valued those in accordance with the tables promulgated by the Louisiana Tax Commission?
Yes.
And you are aware that Interfin was requesting a reduction in value for obsolescence, are you not?
Yes.
I assume you were in the room earlier when Mr. Emery and more importantly, Mr. Frederickson testified, were you not?
Yes.
And Mr. Frederickson testified that they based their request for obsolescence, that in support of their request for obsolescence, they provided your office with a copy of an appraisal. Did your office receive this appraisal?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you a document and ask you if you can review Schedule 5 and tell me, is that your understanding that that was the basis for their request for a reduction in value for obsolescence in Beauregard Parish?
Yes.
Did your office consider that sufficient documentation in support of a request for reduction in obsolescence?
I'm sorry, say again?
Did your office consider the information provided in the appraisal to be sufficient evidence of loss to support a obsolescence reduction request?
We considered it, but it was not enough evidence for me.
Okay, well, for instance, on functional obsolescence, they have just a series of reported percentages. And Mr. Calvanico, the appraiser, had testified that he based that number upon engineering reports. Was your office provided with any engineering reports?
No, not that I'm aware
The next column, economic obsolescence, it's, they base economic obsolescence on percent utilization, which, as we've discussed earlier, is commonly referred to as throughput. They just report a series of percentages, correct?
Correct.
Did they provide any documentation showing how those percentages were derived?
No,
Did they tell you what the original design capacity of these pipelines was?
not that I'm aware
Did
of.
they advise you what the current level of utilization of those pipelines were?
No,
Does your office utilize the throughput formula to determine economic obsolescence?
no,
Now, you are aware that that was formerly in the Tax Commission rules and regulations, are you
Correct.
not? And you're also aware that it is no longer in the Tax Commission rules and regulations.
correct.
Section 1301A2 of the Louisiana Tax Commission's regulations state that functional and/or economic obsolescence shall be considered in the analysis of fair market value as substantiated by the taxpayer in writing. Consistent with Louisiana Revised Statute 47-1957, the assessor may request additional documentation. Did the Beauregard Parish Assessor's Office consider the request for a reduction of value for obsolescence?
Yes,
Was it your office's determination that they substantiated the request for obsolescence in writing?
no,
The last sentence I read to you, consistent with Louisiana Revised Statute 47-1957, the assessor may request additional documentation.
Yes.
Did your office request additional documentation from Interfin?
yes, we did.
And what information did you request?
We requested 3 years audited financials.
And was that information provided to you?
No, they requested that we go back to our previous values, and we stated we could no longer do that in good efforts, and they said, well, then they wouldn't provide the financials.
So they just refused to provide the
Yes.
audited financials
Yes.
to you? And obviously, you are aware that the 2017 ruling entered by the Louisiana Tax Commission is a subject to an appeal brought by your office.
Yes.
Are you not? Did you consider or factor in that challenged ruling in your assessment?
Yes,
But did you use the Tax Commission's numbers?
no,
And that would be because it's in litigation?
correct.
Thank you. No further questions. Answer any questions Ms. Cornick may have.
Specifically, what audited financials of what entity did you request? Because you heard there's no specific entity that owns this system.
We requested from Jeff Taylor audited financials for the past 3 years.
Did he make you aware, as as Enerfin did this year and last year, that there's no specific entity that covers this system, so there are no audited financials of this system?
No, he did not.
Were you someone from your office here last year when that testimony was introduced into the record?
Yes,
Did you have any reason to believe that changed from last year?
from what I understand, that they can pull out the audited financials, but it was all combined through more than one state. That it can be done.
You can't pull information, as you're aware, you can't, when you have an audited financial statement of an entity, you can't pull out an audited financial statement of part of that, right?
I'm not aware of that.
You can take information, but the audited financial is just of an entity, and if they don't have audited financials of just this system, they can't provide that to you. Is that fair?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. So, were you here personally last year?
Yes, I was.
And you listened to the testimony last year?
Yes, I did.
All right. You said they did not provide you with information regarding throughput, correct?
Correct.
But you testified you wouldn't have used it anyway because you don't do that, correct?
Correct.
So it doesn't matter what they provided you or not,
It does matter. We will review it,
but you just don't use it?
but we do not use throughput because it is no longer in the tax commission's table.
So regardless, you would not have given them obsolescence on that?
Not necessarily.
Well, you just told me you didn't use it.
We don't use the throughput, but we would have considered it.
You would have considered it, what you're telling me, but you would not have accepted it,
We would have considered it.
but not accepted it, because you just told me you don't use it.
We would have considered it in giving obsolescence.
So you would have given throughput obsolescence if they had provided some other information to you?
No, I'm just saying we would have considered it,
And you would have rejected it?
not necessarily.
I think you're being a little consistent, because you're telling me you don't use it, but let's move on. They said, you were present last year and heard all the testimony last year,
Yes,
and you got the appraisal last year,
yes,
the 2017 appraisal.
Yes.
And you saw that Exhibit D that Mr. Eddington pointed out to you was discussed at last year's hearing, correct?
yes.
But none of that either factored into your decision this year.
We did not receive Exhibit D.
I understand you did not receive it in 2018. You were present when it was discussed at the hearing in 2017, correct?
Correct.
But because it was not represented to you in 2018, you did not consider that, is that correct?
I looked at what was presented to me for 2018.
Okay. There was a discussion of whether you considered maximum operating pressures versus current operating pressures, correct?
Correct.
And you had the testimony from last year, 2017, on the record from the engineer discussing those, correct?
Correct.
And you were present during that, correct?
Correct.
And you did not consider that information for 2018, is that correct?
We considered it.
But
We
because
did
it's-
not use it.
Okay, you did not use it in any
Right.
way. Just so we're clear, what did you use?
We used the tax commission's tables.
And that's the only thing you used for this assessment?
Yes.
I don't think I have any further questions.
Ms. Parrish, one quick follow-up. You testified that you were at the hearing last year. Do you recall that there was an objection made to the admissibility of Exhibit D last year?
I don't recall.
I will tell you, if you read the record, it reflects that there was an objection because this information had never been presented to you prior to submission as a tax commission exhibit. Can you tell me, was that information provided to you in conjunction with Interfin's 2017?
No, I don't recall this.
Thank you. No further questions.
I have one question. You said go back to prior values earlier. Did I hear that right? That when you asked for the audited financials, they said go back to prior
Oh, yes.
values?
Yes.
What does that mean?
We had given them considered obsolescence in previous years, and we decided we couldn't do that anymore. And so we requested them to give us audited financials for the past 3 years, and they said that they couldn't do that, and they wanted their obsolescence back to what it was the year prior.
So how was that, that's kind of leading up to my next question. How was that determined in the past? And I'm
That
trying to
was-
get a little history on this, because
Yeah.
I know this pipeline's old, so it's been there for a certain period of time. It got to the point where it's maybe gonna be abandoned. These folks step in, they buy it. So I'm thinking, man, we up here, we're going down to almost nothing, and now we have a transition period. Where did the values change?
It was previous administration and before my time, so I really
Okay.
can't answer that.
Okay, all right, fair question. Good answer, thank you.
Actually, I do have one follow-up
Yeah.
question. I'm glad you mentioned it. There's a lot of discussion about audited financials. When your office requested audited financials, again in conjunction with the 2018 assessment, were you told that that information was not available or simply that it would not be provided?
Would not be provided.
So they never told you that we don't have that information, we
No.
can't produce it?
No.
They just said we're not going to?
Right.
Thank you. No further
I
questions.
just have a couple of follow-ups to that. You were here, though, last year when it was explained that there are no audited financials that relate solely to this system.
Yes.
Okay, and you didn't have any reason to think that changed?
From what I understand, it could have been pulled out.
Okay, and we had that discussion before. And you were here for the testimony in 2017 when that financial information was discussed.
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to make it clear, there was a period after Enerfin bought this system in 2007, 2008, 2000, that period, that your office did provide them with obsolescence off the assessor's tables, correct?
Correct.
And that went on for a number of years, correct?
Correct.
And this was after Enerfin had bought the pipeline, after it had been repurposed, all this kind of thing, when it was operating, as Mr. Imrie said, in essentially the same situation as it is now, your office did provide obsolescence off the tables.
I think they did, I'm not positive.
Well, you said it changed because you decided you couldn't do that anymore. That's your testimony, remember?
Correct.
When did you decide you could not do obsolescence anymore?
That was in 2017, I think.
Okay, that was when Mr. Imrie testified that those numbers started going way up.
Correct.
And back in the early days, when you were providing obsolescence, the taxpayer had provided you, for example, the purchase and sale agreements and those kinds of information to show you what the value of this system was worth, correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay, we can have Mr. Imrie talk about that if you're not sure, but you wouldn't have any reason to doubt that.
No.
And you wouldn't have any reason to doubt that your office had the basis to provide economic and functional obsolescence prior to 2017, correct?
Correct.
And what made you decide in 2017 that you could no longer provide obsolescence?
Like I said, that was before my time, so that was someone else working that schedule, so I can't really answer that.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that you testified, we decided we couldn't do that anymore, I think were your exact words.
Yes.
And what I'm asking is, who decided and why?
That would have been the assessor, and that was prior, that was the previous lady that was in the personal property department. And that was from emails that we have received
Emails from whom?
between Jeff and Elaine.
What in those emails made the...
Could you identify Jeff and Elaine?
I'm sorry. Jeff with Merritt and Elaine Powers, previous.
What in those emails made the office decide that after years of providing obsolescence, it was no longer appropriate to provide obsolescence?
I don't know that answer.
All you know is...
Someone else would have to answer that.
Okay, so all
That's
you
not
know
up to
is
me.
that around 2017, your office changed its position on obsolescence.
Correct.
I don't think I have any more questions.
Just quick, what's bothering me is, we had earlier testimony that basically, in my simplistic language, that this pipeline has been repurposed. I think that's a fair statement. Does that give any pause to the consideration that we may need to delve into some obsolescence? And I'm not discussing at all that, you should be given what they would ultimately ask for like last year, but just that even based on a financial statement, let's say, that didn't adequately, in your opinion, and fairly, didn't provide all the information that you would like to have, would your office contact the taxpayer and say, hey, can you provide us more information? Can you come in and provide us more information? Can you give us this, and this about this system? We understand you're asking for additional obsolescence to be applied, but we're not comfortable at this point that we have enough information to support that. 'Cause, I'm certain if a homeowner came in after the tax bill came out and showed you where there was damage in the property, there's a good chance the local assessor might correct that. So I'm just saying, when the books are open, with all this discussion, would your office make that inquiry to the taxpayer? Or did the office make the inquiry and the taxpayer told you, we're not going to talk to you, and just refused to give you more information? That's two extremes, but I'm not saying y'all would do that. But, you know, it just seems to me that you become aware of something like this, and that even though the taxpayer, property owner hasn't given you all the information you'd like to have, but you're aware of it, and you're aware that, you know, this could be a real dispute, why wouldn't you pick up the phone and call and say, give me some more information?
We requested audited financials.
Okay, but their response was that they have an audited statement for the company, is that correct? And so in an audited financial statement, you can't suck out of that audited statement numbers that you could say are audited. I mean, you'd have to actually audit those numbers in that specific system. So if it's not something that they have, they can't provide it if they don't have it.
Did you specifically ask, I'm sorry to interrupt, did you specifically ask and say it had to be audited?
We requested audited.
Because I think, if I remember correctly, what they said was they could get a derived schedule, but they said I thought that it was that they could not get audited, because you cannot do that. There's no way, you would have to re-audit the numbers. You can't, an audit is the whole thing, footnotes and everything. You cannot pull out a piece of paper or a schedule, and I think what they had said was that they could maybe give you a schedule, but it wouldn't be audited. So,
I'm not sure. I know we told them we could offer 20% obsolescence as long as they could also provide audited financials. And they said, then we will appeal. I mean, that was the end of it.
What about a sworn affidavit? Would that suffice? In other words, because they can't pull those numbers out without doing another independent audit of that company, would you consider taking a sworn affidavit?
Yes, I mean, yeah.
But you didn't ask for that, you asked for audited statements?
Right.
Okay.
Actually, let me just do a quick follow-up. Ms. Ferris, earlier you had testified that, you know, they didn't tell you this information was just available. They just said, we're not going to provide it,
Right,
correct?
right.
Did they offer a derived schedule?
No,
Did they offer an affidavit
No.
providing any of this information to your office?
no,
Instead, they just, when you requested additional information, they simply said no.
right.
Okay, thank you.
Real quickly, real quickly. You were here last year,
Yes,
and you know that testimony was sworn.
yes,
So that was sworn, that's better than a sworn affidavit, because the witnesses were cross-examined, right?
yes,
Okay, and so last year, Mr. Emery testified there were no audited financial statements, correct?
correct,
So you were aware of that this year when you asked for audited financial statements?
correct.
So when you asked for them, you knew they didn't exist?
I don't know if they exist or not.
You heard the sworn testimony last year they didn't,
He said it wasn't, so,
and it was sworn testimony?
yes,
Okay. And you also heard discussion last year that was sworn testimony about the financial situation of this specific system, correct?
correct.
So that sworn testimony was not as good as a sworn affidavit, which you said you would have taken?
No, I guess it would be the same.
So, but you did not consider the sworn testimony you actually had from last year about the financial situation of this system?
No,
But you would have considered a sworn affidavit, you said?
yes.
I don't think it had been
I have a question for the taxpayer. Could it be possible to provide your audited financial statement of the entity and then carve out a statement to support the valuation, the income approach?
I mean, I think that's what the appraisal did, is essentially take financial information.
Right, so evidently somebody derived from the audited statement some financial data
Well, I don't think it was.
tied to the
the
system.
audited statement. I mean, Mr. Emery can explain what was provided.
So I think the audited financial would, in essence, look at, kind of, sort of paint the overall picture of that entity. And I'm assuming it's not building airplanes as a division, or I'm sure it's all energy related. So I guess what I'm saying is, from an assessor standpoint, although you can't rely specifically on that audited financial, knowing that it is audited should be a good grounds and basis for using that financial data that's extracted for the purpose of the appraisal.
Well, I don't think you can pull out, you can know from an audited financial statement the numbers for this system. I can call Mr. Emery back.
I know, but
again
you
if
could
I
simply
can.
state in a letter that included in this audited statement is this Neil pipeline, its associated revenues and/or expenses and allocated overhead. But, you know, it's included in these numbers.
But there would be no way to tell that from the
I
audited
understand,
financial.
I understand that.
Right,
But I think it would also paint an overall picture of whether there's pain and suffering going on.
Well, that's
et
what
cetera.
the appraisal did. The appraisal took that information and painted a picture of the current
So,
market value.
so include a financial that was used, that the appraiser used. The appraiser got a financial.
Well, Mr. Emery can testify as to what we gave you.
And that financial, I'm assuming, is included in the audited numbers. So let's just kind of have the audited financial here with a subschedule. And look, some of these audited financials, I don't know how detailed they get, they may take each pipeline or each division as a subschedule of the audit and combine them to that one combined audited financial. I don't know, I'm not looking at their audited financial, I can't tell you how they prepared it. But I just think it would just be, the more information, the better. At least they can have more purpose to do what they do.
Well, and I can bring Mr. Emery back to testify what's available for the audited financial statements and what they gave you, appraiser, but I can even follow that up with another question. You were given, your office was given an appraisal that included financial data, correct?
Correct.
Did your office ask for the financial data that was used by the appraiser?
No.
Ms. Ferris, let's be clear, was your office provided with the financial information that was utilized by the assessor, the appraiser?
No.
And you're aware that the appraisal was not the basis for the rendition this year?
I'm not sure.
Well, and furthermore, as far as the appraisal is concerned, none of it included in the audit. All it basically is using is projected. So there really is no audited financial information in this appraisal.
And because the appraisal was of the system, and there are no audited financials of the system or of an entity.
But even stated, it's a projected operating statement.
Because it's a valuation. Yeah, I mean, if you look back on page 18, in the 2017 appraisal, because the 2018 was an update, in page 18 of the 2017 appraisal, which is also an exhibit, there's past gross margins, operating expenses, net operating income, all that kind of information. And it was all.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the 2018 right
And
now.
the assessor's office in 2017 was provided the 2017 appraisal, and it was discussed here at the hearing. And in 2018, we simply provided the 2018 update. But if you look, there is that, in the income capitalization approach in page 18, there's the past information.
You said that you would have offered the taxpayer 20% obsolescence if they provided sufficient information. Where did the 20% come from?
That was just something that the assessor come up with.
I don't know how appropriate that is,
The record can reflect the witnesses discussing that.
discussing it. Yeah.
It was 20% before we actually, we were giving them 20%, and then they wanted more, and then we said we will give you more if you would give us audited financials. We could consider that.
So did you apply 20%? So
No.
you didn't give them anything?
We
So
did
you went
not.
back to zero?
We went back to
So you
what
offer
the
them
tables
20%,
were.
and then say, provide more information and we can give you more.
We could look at
But
it.
they
and
didn't
if-
give you more information,
Right.
so you took the 20% off the table.
Right.
I think it's part of the problem is the tables just kind of take into account pipeline costs based on diameter, et cetera, and don't really, we don't have two different tables where you repurpose, and there's not a, I guess, an oil and gas usage table and a natural gas usage table, right? There's just one table based on the cost. So that's where the income valuation has to be weighted in.
So that 20%, what was the basis for it?
That would be, the assessor would have to answer that.
What, was there a basis?
I'm sure there was.
It was a compromise number.
Gotcha. Okay.
Compromise between,
Attempting to compromise with them and forego the
Oh, okay.
necessity of coming to hearing.
try to work it out.
Yeah, yeah.
Any more questions? Good.
I've got one more, I'd like to call Michael Beeler, the assessor of Vernon Parish. Mr. Beeler, can you identify yourself?
My name is Michael Beeler, Vernon Parish Assessor.
And you are familiar with your office's assessment of property belonging to Interfin Field Services, are you not?
I am.
For 2018, can you tell me how your office went about determining the assessed value of this property? Did you utilize the tables incorporated into the Louisiana Tax Commission's guidelines?
We did. We reviewed the information that was submitted to us and applied the Louisiana Tax Commission guidelines.
And there's been a lot of talk about obsolescence. You are aware that Interfin was requesting an additional reduction for obsolescence, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Frederick testified that in addition to the renditions, the only other documentation they provided you was an appraisal. Is that correct?
Correct.
I'm going to hand you that appraisal and ask if you can look at Schedule 5 of that document,
Okay.
which has been established is really the full discussion of obsolescence in that appraisal. Did your office consider, let's start with the functional obsolescence. The percentage of operating pressure, did your office consider the information provided to you in writing to be sufficient proof of obsolescence loss?
We did not feel that it was sufficient to back up their claim.
Mr. Calvanico last year had testified that he based that number upon engineering reports that were provided to him. Were those engineering reports provided to your office?
No, they were not.
And were they provided to your office in 2017 or at any point in the past?
No.
What about functional obsolescence? What do you understand their functional obsolescence request to be based on?
Functional or external?
I'm sorry, economic, also known as external.
Okay. As I understand it, that was the throughput factor.
And how did they report that information to you?
It's just a number in a table.
And did they provide up any support documentation showing how that information, or that percentage was derived?
None whatsoever.
They didn't provide you, did they tell you what the design capacity of the pipeline is?
Not that I recall, no.
Did they provide you any documentation showing what the current percent of utilization, or the current level of utilization of that pipeline is?
Nothing other than this table.
So all you got was a percentage.
Yes.
Now, last year, you testified that you had requested financial information
I did.
from Interfin, and it was not provided to you.
Correct.
Was that information provided to you in 2018?
No, 17 or 18, no.
And were you told that the information wasn't provided, or simply that it wasn't, well, I'm sorry, that it wasn't available, or simply that it wouldn't be provided?
If I recall correctly, the conversation that my chief deputy had, he was told that they were just going to proceed with the appeal.
In your opinion, is the written information provided to your office by Interfin sufficient evidence of obsolescence?
No, not in the amount that they're requesting.
And that was the determination of your office that this was not sufficiently documented, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. No further questions. Answer any questions Ms. Cornick might have.
So you did not have the conversation with the taxpayer's representative about additional financial information?
I was involved with that conversation in 2017. I did not have that conversation with them in 2018.
Was the additional financial information requested, as far as you know, audited financial statements?
To be honest, I don't recall.
Do you know whether Mr. Emery testified and the taxpayer testified last year that that was the additional information that was requested, audited financial statements?
From Vernon Parish?
Yes.
It very well may have been.
Yeah, okay, and you don't have a reason to know that it was anything different in 2018?
No.
Okay. You understand that the purpose of what the taxpayer's doing and providing to you is to establish fair market value of the property, correct?
Their opinion of fair market value, yes.
Okay, and how often do you determine that an appraisal is not sufficient information to demonstrate fair market value?
Well, it's a case-by-case basis.
So when other taxpayers provide appraisals to you, do you reject them as insufficient to establish fair market value?
We very well may, yes.
Do you ever ask for additional information to back up those appraisals before you reject them?
Yes, in good faith, I doubt that I would ever just take a number on a page and accept it no matter what, if that's what you're asking. I mean, I would have to be satisfied that the information was accurate and correct.
I'm not asking about a number on a page.
Okay?
I'm asking about, my understanding is that when most taxpayers come into your office and they dispute a fair market value, like for their home or for a building, the most likely support they would bring for that fair market value would be an appraisal by a certified appraiser, correct?
If they did, we would consider it like we did in this case.
Okay. Do you ever consider an appraisal done by a certified reputable appraiser to be sufficient evidence of fair market value?
I would say yes.
You would do that all the time with respect to homes and businesses and other buildings, wouldn't you?
Well, I can't tell you that I would do that every time, no.
Do you do it on a regular basis?
We're a very small rural parish. The amount of taxpayers that show up in our office with an appraisal is pretty limited.
But generally when they do, that's evidence of fair market value.
Sometimes, yes.
How many other times have you rejected an appraisal because the taxpayer didn't provide you with all of the backup that the appraiser used?
I have no idea.
Are you ever aware of another situation where you rejected an appraisal done by a certified appraiser as evidence of fair market value because the taxpayer did not provide all of the backup that the appraiser used?
All of the backup that the appraiser used or that I requested?
All of the backup that the appraiser used.
Okay, let me be honest with you here. I remember maybe once or twice have I been provided with an appraisal to dispute one of my values since I've been assessor of Vernon Parish. They were on residential properties. Whether I used the exact value that was on that appraisal or not, I can't tell you.
But you're not-
Excuse me one second, let's take a 5-minute break. I need a motion to do that?
I think you just made it.
Do I need a vote on the motion to take a 5-minute break?